To the May 17th Educational Affairs Committee meeting. Thank you for your flexibility meeting on a Wednesday night. We will start by taking roll call. Will be
Dan Schultz here. Zachary Epps present.
Charles Riddell Williams present.
Julie Haywood present. Pam Henry present.
Jennifer Lohman present. We had two board members one who is on Zoom as well, I think, Leah Mulhern, perhaps, and Mr. Fishbein is able to join us tonight. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 25th, 2023 Educational Affairs Committee meeting?
Second.
I have a comment, just one minor comment. For the members of the public attending the in-person, Ross Whiting's last name is missing an I.
I've got that fixed. So with that edit, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved. All right, so tonight
Point of
Yes.
order, and I'm not trying to call Ms. Mulhern out, but is she present? Because I think we should have the records accurately reflect she is.
she's not on
She's
yet.
not.
Okay, thank you. She'll probably be on later. Yeah. So Dr. Smith, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May Educational Affairs Committee meeting. Tonight's presentation will be a little modified than what we are accustomed to. All of our illustrious building principals will come to the front seat in order to present their latest benchmark data, and also to talk about any updates or modifications and results of their school improvement planning for the school year. At this time, I will turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Riley, who will walk us through the slides, and we will just ask our principals, as your school is called, that you come and take a lead seat. We don't know if other board members will be coming to take the other seat, so if we can get our administrators to come up one school at a time. So Mr. Beirut, please join Mr. DeAndrea when he comes up to represent Cheltenham High School.
And Dr. Smith, we will not have any more board members in person, because I remember Mr. Cohen told us that he had a prior obligation tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. First slide, we'll start with our mission and vision statement, as we typically do. I'm going to move right into kind of the purpose of why we're here tonight. Back at the start of the school year, we talked about school improvement, the school improvement plan, its continuous school improvement process. Not new to Cheltenham, but what is a little different is this plan, do, study, act cycle. And so we did share this back at the October meeting, and what our principals did at that time was to talk about that first block, that blue block on the top left, in terms of looking at past data, SSAs, keystones, CDTs, classroom assessments, that sort of thing, to answer the question of where are we now, to help them think about where could we be and what's not getting us there, so the root cause analysis. Designing a SMART goal so that we can identify where do we want to be, and then creating a plan to get us there. Once that was done, school year kicks off, we put those things into action, and we're thinking about how that implementation is going to happen. And so utilizing building leadership, PLCs in the schools, instructional best practices and intervention, as well as some other things that each building will talk about tonight. Moving on from there, we wanted to make sure are those actions really having the impact that they're designed to do? And so we're down in the study piece now. So are we making a difference? We need to assess our students to see where we're having any sort of impact, analyze those results, and evaluate the progress towards that SMART goal. From there, we then think about how can we keep doing the things that make a difference, right? And so taking the things that are working and improving upon those processes, or standardizing those improvements so that they are universal across the building or across the district. And then we return back to the plan phase. And so this is a cycle that continues throughout the year. We're nearing the end of the school year. And I'm going to share 2 slides, and those 2 slides are a template for what you're going to see from each of the buildings. maybe. This one-
Oh, there it is.
Did I go too far? No, okay. All right, so there's gonna be 2 slides for each school. Just to point a couple things out, if you see the icons on the left, they may not be labeled. So the blue one is for English language arts. The middle one, the orange one is math, and then the bottom red one is science. Our K through 6 schools will only talk about ELA and math. They didn't have a SMART goal for science, but the secondary schools did. And then the SMART goal that was identified at the start of the school year, or if it had changed throughout the year, is going to be talked about. And just to orient you here, the top section is just explaining each of the columns. And then there's an example provided as well. And so in terms of what you may see. All right. And so the SMART goal, just to reiterate what SMART stands for, we're talking about a specific, measurable, attainable, or achievable, relevant, and time-based goal. The second column is the school improvement plan implementation. Essentially, these are the action items that were designed to address the SMART goal. And they could fall under any of those categories in terms of what strategies are we implementing, what programs are we implementing, the processes and the people that we need to implement those actions. The column all the way to the right is the evaluation of results. So here we're looking at, are we making progress towards the SMART goal? And so this isn't necessarily a data component. This is just, are we making progress towards that goal? And to what degree are we? The next slide starts with evidence of improvement. This is where you may see some data. All right, and the data will vary depending on which school and which level. I did highlight the fact that we don't have all of our local or state testing results. As you know, PSSA is just finished. We just began Keystones at the high school. We'll be doing Keystones at the middle school next week. And so there is a lot of data that is still being collected. And so you may not see all of that in this presentation. The middle column is just areas of needed improvement. So either existing targeted areas that we've tried to address this year and feel that there's still room for improvement, or through the analysis of data, we may identify new focus areas that we're going to think about for next year, which is the last column, and those are next steps. So what are we thinking about as this year is ending? What are some things that we're thinking about for the summer? And then trying to get a head start on our school improvement plan for next year, thinking about what do we want to see done at the start of next school year, especially thinking about what sort of analysis do we need to do once all that data has been collected. All right, and so we're going to start with Cheltenham Elementary. And I'm sorry, before Mr. Perez begins, if you're looking at the board docs presentation, the order of the schools is different than what we're going to do tonight. We're going to be presenting by level and alphabetically. And we'll make those adjustments and repost the presentation on board docs. Mr. Perez.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So I'm going to share with you some information regarding our goals and areas that we tackled and some of the actions that we implemented this school year. And obviously, we're still working on some things once we have our final results and data to move forward. But in the area of English and language arts, the goal was a focus area for us, looking at our data from previous years, and it was to focus on key ideas and details in literature, specifically in nonfiction and or informational text. So the action steps that we took, we did a lot of planning in our PLC teams to obviously review past data, look at our trends, identify students needing some additional assistance. We created small amount of common assessments. We created pre and post assessments internally, and also the teachers themselves utilized a lot of the goal setting measures for their school performance measures in their evaluation as well. We had some new teachers in third and fourth grade. We had some long-term subs, and we had a new teacher who moved from a math specialist into fourth grade. So we needed to do some PD on kind of get everyone up to speed, especially with what we were going to utilize as far as some resources and the SAS portal. So we looked a lot at our winter data. And when we got to our winter data, our teams worked on their data protocols, marked out some steps that they were going to take with small group instruction, interventions, and working on students who didn't have the growth that was expected. In our initial kind of evaluation of results, we determined that not everyone was at the same pace when they came in with different levels of understanding, foundational skills that they needed to implement within the classroom. We determined that there was an inconsistent usage as well of some of the resources that we had, including our IXL resources, as some teachers were looking for things that were either targeted directly to that standard area or things that were a little bit more engaging for students. In the evaluation, it was determined as well that when we looked over the data regarding the winter benchmark, can you move to the next slide? Because I'm going to bounce back and just get the reading, and then I'll come back to that math. There we go. Under the evidence area, we looked over our data after the winter benchmark. We targeted students for additional interventions, as well as targeted tutoring support. We found that difficult for some reasons, specifically when we were targeting students for additional tutoring support. We had some issues with, trying to ensure that we can get students there, whether it was in the morning or after school. So we had some issues with ensuring that we could target the specific students for extra tutoring. But within the local classroom and the common assessments, you can see that we did meet our initial targets. And the overall target, we focused on fourth grade. So that's why I have that one kind of highlighted. We did meet the 10%. We did have a higher percentage in our common assessments, where we just separated and focused on those specific standards that were dealing with the literature area. But obviously, when we took the CDTs and they had to test on all of the standards, their overall results or that specific subscale increase wasn't as high. So looking at the fourth grade data, we didn't perform as we thought that we should. As we tested on the standard, they did make an 11% increase from the fall to the winter. The scale scored were an increase. There was definitely an increase from the cohort that we had last year. So there was a 72% increase overall in that subscore. And there was a 34% increase as if we compared the cohort, from last year, from the same time frame. Under the areas of improvement for literacy, there was some differences in what we noticed in the delivery of what was happening within the classrooms. When students were going to some of the intervention groups, we also had to make some adjustments with the timing as well. With the amount of time that we said was going to occur during the intervention period, we needed to kind of utilize days versus weeks, because there were some times where we had to shift people around for staffing, and students were not getting the exact time frame for the intervention that they were scheduled for. So we adjusted a little bit. Our next steps for our reading goal would be definitely to analyze the May data. Once we take our test and get that in, we'll look to identify our summer learning opportunities for students. We'll also look to expand some of our tier 2 supports. We definitely saw from our review that we needed some additional tier 2 programming and supports for both literacy and math. So we're looking to review a couple of programs that some are currently being used at other schools. So we're looking to move forward with some of that for next year. And we would like to explore if there's opportunities as well, because of the concern that came up for our tutoring, to see if there's a way to work with our Right at School program to determine opportunities that we could have with utilizing their support in with our students, whether it's in the morning or the afternoon, to work with our families so that students can get tutoring as well. So if you want to jump back, and I'll do the math. In the area of math, we targeted numbers and operations. That is a very broad standard. There's a lot of standards underneath numbers and operations. It is a good chunk of the PSSA and the CDTs. A lot of what we did under the action planning was similar to what we did with reading, with a lot of planning and preparation. However, we did notice that because there was a lot of standards being covered, we definitely saw that we needed more common assessments. We initially had 1 or 2 common assessments that we created, but as we went through, we realized there were so many standards that needed to be covered. We definitely realized that there were more common assessments that we would need. We did see that there was some alignment as well, some scheduling alignment that we needed to do as well with our support. Our common assessments did show that there was an increase of about 16% between the pre and post assessments. Again, when we separated specific targeted standards, but overall, when they took the CDT, they didn't make the gains that we expected. If you can skip over to the next slide. Unfortunately, the 4th grade here on the bottom did only make a 5% increase from the fall to the winter with our benchmark. Hopefully we're going to see a larger increase when we do the May assessment. We included the 3rd grade in both of these areas because even though we wanted to kind of look at where the students are, and obviously we're going to focus on them as well for next year. So we wanted to also see their point increases, their subscale increases as well. Again, we were definitely disappointed in the scoring on our math subscale. We did again show an increase in our common assessments. In the areas of improvement, we definitely saw a need for aligning a lot of our tier 2 processes to what the teachers are doing within the classroom. There are times where we needed to pull our math specialists for a lot of coverages, so we definitely need to provide some more tier 2 support opportunities for our students. That will occur within the classroom. That's why we're also looking at some additional programming and tier 2 supports. We definitely saw a need to, again, increase more common assessment in all of our eligible content standards, and also kind of align. We're hoping that we can, once we have our curricular documents, we can align our common assessments and our best practices to be more consistent with what each classroom is doing. In our next steps, again, we're going to continue working and analyzing our final data points and data sets that we're getting at the end of the school year. We're targeting students for continued summer learning opportunities. And again, as well, looking at tier 2 supports, tier 3 support opportunities that we can provide within the classroom. We also, within the team, talked about parent workshop opportunities that we can expand. We did have a teacher that did a pilot in 4th grade and invited some parents in to do a couple of things with them in the area of mathematics. She got some good feedback from that. We're looking to expand that next year moving forward across the 3rd and 4th grade. And that'll, our goal is to, basically just extend what we're doing in the school and at home and provide parents some resources and some strategies for students who want to continue practicing some skills at home with students. I think that was all on mine. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Perez. I think since we're gonna have so many schools, I think we should do
Wait till-
questions, or actually, I think we should do questions, because I, for one, am gonna forget if I wait until the very, very end. So I'll open it up to board questions.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. A lot of
Yes.
stuff going on. Just one quick question. When you're targeting or identifying students for summer learning opportunities, are those going to be offered through the school district or are these external?
No, it'll be the ones that are going to be offered through the school district. We are going to get a list of students that are identified from the data, and then we're just looking to kind of expand from that list. If there are certain students that aren't going to be able to take on that responsibility or that opportunity, then we're going to kind of fill it in with other students that are close to those students that need the support, as well as our kindergarten students where we don't have a lot of data on them. So we're going to target that specifically for the data that we can have.
And this is, go ahead.
I want to just add on that. So that's the expectation for all the schools. We have allotted more student seats than we've invited students, to give principals and teachers the flexibility to add to that list. So for example, I met with all of the elementary reading specialists today. They're going to be reaching out to their principals to recommend students whose data may not reflect, as Mr. Perez said, that they should be a part of the summer program, but we purposely padded the numbers to make sure that we invited who we saw based on data, and to give principals and schools flexibility to add to that. And we've also, and I'm giving this statement now because it applies to all of our K-6 programs, we've also hired enough staff so that the class sizes are smaller than they've ever been in the summer, to really drill down and to really target.
Thank you. And this is a really, it's a question for everybody when they present, but just a general observation, and you may not even be able to extrapolate, but is there a sense of looking at the data throughout the year to ascertain really kind of how the students would perform or will perform on the standardized testing? I know we don't have that data now, but is there any kind of predictive way to say that when we're looking at this data, it allows us to kind of predict how our students will perform on the standardized tests?
I know that the CDT does offer within it, it gives you an idea where students might be. I know that, as well as PVAS data will also give us kind of a growth measure, or what they're expected to be, based on the data that we currently have. So there is some predictors in place. But again, it's hard to see with any kind of common assessment. I think that obviously we don't get that.
Right. And I ask that, it's a hypothetical question because I know it's not a complete one-to-one match, obviously, and depends on the day the student takes the test, what's going on, we know all the possible variables. But I ask that because I'm just trying to figure out, are there ways to look at the data throughout the school year to say, are there things we could be doing or should be doing that would allow us to predict even more accurately how students would perform on the standardized tests?
Yeah, and I think some of the other programs, if they're utilizing it, such as like IXL and Lexia and iReady, as they're going in through those programs and they're doing the activities and they're doing the practice exams, things of that nature, that will give us probably more of the current data and trends, and it'll identify students who may be struggling or students that are kind of making, the growth that we're expected. So those programs do help us get almost like real-time data versus, between the assessments or the pre-assessments that we would give.
Thank you.
I'll just add real quick, because we take all of the data that we get from the CDT and put it into Linkit. And Linkit provides a predictive score for us. So when we look at the data from the CDT, we can look at what they refer to as native performance levels, which is the CDT performance levels, which are below grade level, at grade level, and above grade level. Linkit also has their predictive levels based on the PSSA levels. They are just predictive, and so they report the accuracy of those predictions across all their clients in Pennsylvania that are using the CDT. And so we're still in the process of trying to study how accurate those predictions are for Cheltenham. So we don't want to rely on what Linkit tells us in terms of their accuracy. We want to develop our own level of accuracy with those predictions. So we don't, I try to shy away from those predictions until we understand them a little better. We don't know what the algorithm is that Linkit uses, and it's a moving target. And so we're cautious to look at a student who's predicted to be proficient when they take the first CDT in September, because it's still September. And the cut scores that Linkit uses adjust throughout the school year. So they're constantly growing. And that makes it a little bit difficult for us right now. The more data we get, we can start to identify a correlation between their predictive levels and our actual levels as we get PSSA data in.
Thank you.
Any other board members' questions?
I also appreciate the presentation from everyone tonight. Principal Perez, and I would ask sort of generally if this of everyone as well. I see a lot of success and increase in scale, subscale grades and progress, which means growth at students and academic achievement. And I also heard not being probably where we want to be in certain areas. So could you sort of add a snapshot of like, are we okay with where things are and where they're headed across some of these other data points?
I mean, from personally, I think within our math area, I think that, you know, that was an area that, you know, I believe that the students should have performed better. You know, I'm hoping that with the May results, we'll see a difference, especially with our fourth grade. There was a lot going on with our fourth grade this school year. Overall, that's not, you know, indicative of what you see within the data. So we're hoping that, you know, as we kind of see the end of the year data, we'll see a difference. We'll see some increases there. But again, you know, there's those other things that are not within the data that you'll see that may have impacted, you know, things that are going on within the classroom, things of that nature, consistency of what was happening as far as, you know, the quality of teaching, things of that nature. So those are all things that I looked at on my end to say that, you know, I could say this is probably why it ended up the way that it was in the area of math, even in the area of reading as well. I think definitely there could have been some, you know, some opportunities there that we missed, you know, to increase our scores significantly. But you know, we're hopefully, you know, with some, you know, some of our next steps and areas that we need to improve upon, we'll get to those targets.
I appreciate that. And I don't ask that as like a judgment question. It's like just a snapshot. Are we okay with where we're going? So, and you just mentioned, so, and you mentioned with the May data, you'll be able to, you know, further and deepen the assessment. So I'll move forward. So I'm encouraged as well because we've recently approved a strategic plan that is also called for, I think, some refining, revamping of our MTSS program. And I see that here clearly defined as well. So I'm encouraged that, again, things are underway already, and it's, you know, it's a living and breathing document. And so you mentioned, and we see it here, there's part professional development, like part programming that is needed to sort of improve or expand the use. So in terms of the programming, can that be done with things we already have? Or are we going to be looking to make investments in different types of programming as the system is refined and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, some of the programs that I mentioned here would be an investment, but within the school budget. So there is opportunities that within the school budget, we can, you know, utilize what's already provided within our school budget. So it's not necessarily going to be something that I feel is going to be additional funding that's going to be for those programs.
No, that's great. So that's not where I was going either, because I've been asked, so I appreciate this, because not too long ago, actually, in the facilities, in the facilities and finance meeting, I was asking like, hey, as we start to make some of these budget decisions, what are the types of investments that it means for students and staff and so forth? And so this is an example of that we can connect to the strategic plan. It's actually happening. We can see growth, right? And where the specific adjustments are needed. And now we actually can talk about investments that we're making to actually course correct and expand. So I'm certainly encouraged by what I've mentioned.
Yeah, and these areas would, some of these programs will be targeted to Tier 2 students. Obviously, if we were looking to expand these programs, school-wide and have licenses for every student in the building, then obviously it's different cost points there. But these will be specifically for smaller licenses targeted for students who are needing Tier 2 or Tier 3 interventions.
And just to make, if it's showing that it's working, it might be a case where we want to say, let's spend some additional funding in areas that are working. So yeah, that through line is so important. So thanks.
Any other questions from board members? I just have a question. What does CDT stand for again?
Classroom diagnostic tool. And it's the state's benchmarking. So it's the same system that we use to take the PSSA and the Keystones in.
Okay.
So they become familiar with the testing platform while they're benchmarking, which is a form of preparation for the state test as well.
Thank you. And I also want the tutoring that's provided. Who's providing the tutoring?
Oh, our own classroom teachers, our own teachers within our school.
Oh, okay, all right. That's probably, okay, because if you're having sort of trouble getting kids there, could the tutoring be offered during the school day, or is it because?
So some of the tutoring, some of the enrichment would be, and some of the interventions would be offered during the school day. There are kids that we felt needed even more than that, and those are students that we were targeting for either before school or after school tutoring.
Thank you. Any questions from the administrative public? Is there anybody online, Dr. Riley?
There are people online, but there are no questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perez.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Griffin, the guest principal from Glenside. And I'm going to thank Brian publicly. Thank you so much for all the help with this. Just going over our SMART goal for literacy, we're looking for an 80% or more scholars demonstrate at least 5% growth by December 2022, focusing on main idea, key details, and informational and literacy texts. That being put together, and then we're focusing on our third and fourth grade teams. Our team worked together, looking for opportunities for both main idea and key details. The goal was throughout the course of the year to really consistently expose the students to both informational text and fictional text through our shared reading lessons, guided reading groups, as well as independent reading opportunities, focusing on read alouds, retells. This again was across all grades, not just 3 and 4. Also, implementation of our progress or MTSS process being implemented with full fidelity, focusing on comprehension skills as our focal point, and also utilizing the WIN periods to do this, whole class and small group instruction. We implemented RASKIS, IXL, CDT, tests were administered on these skills to measure progress. And focus on student, right, that's the last one. We also focused on student writing, specifically text-dependent analysis. Our fourth graders are actually assessed at that, utilizing that, and the thought behind it was if the kids are writing, they're also reading. Now I need to go over. All right, so I did this a little differently but really, so the evaluation results, looking at the CDT scores and comparing that to the 80%, we found that 58% of our students made that goal of increasing by 5%. 4% grew but 3 to 5%, and 6% grew 0 to 3%. Now, if you put all those numbers together, you get 68% progress. Keep in mind with the PSSAs don't just only look at achievement, but they also look at student progress. And so it's really critically important to realize that if the kids are moving in the right direction, they continue to move, and if the process is working, then we want to continue with the, we'll say, interventions that we are actually implementing. And that was, by the way, for informational text. If you go down to the next one for grade 3, you can see for literacy, or for literature, 57% of our students made the goal that Glenside had put up of 80%. I mean, a 5% increase, and then 6% grew by 3 to 5%, 4 grew by 0 to 3%. But there's a total of 67% of our students who, again, made progress. If you look at 4th grade informational text, you can see that 54% of our students grew by at least 5%, 3% of our students grew by 3%, and that was 3 to 5%, excuse me, and then 10% grew by 0 to 3%. And a total of 67%. And then in 4th grade, looking at literature again, 53% of our students grew by at least 5%, meeting that goal that Glenside set. 6% grew by 3 to 5%, and 3% grew by 0 to 3%. But again, with a total of 62% of our students making that positive growth. Now, I took those items, if you want to go to the next page, and really looked at them as, you know, where we are as progress and where we also need to work upon. And it really did come down to across the lines. If you see, you can see that our students in 3rd grade scored a little bit higher than our students in 4th grade. But we already went over these. At 68% of our students had positive growth in informational text in 3rd grade, and literacy text was 67% of our students. And then in 4th grade, it was 67% of our students had positive growth and in informational text, and 62% in literature. Taking that information and looking what we already put in place. I did actually miss something. Let me go back up real quick. Oh, no, I didn't. I got it. So looking at some of the things that are already in place and then talking about next steps, we felt that, you know, we wanted to increase opportunities for students to read and discuss informational text, including utilizing social studies and science as instructional opportunities. They need to be able to apply what they're reading, so why not also make sure that you're incorporating social, you know, the subjects of social studies and science. Foster a love of literature in a classroom, and that's not like a kumbaya thing. It's really just trying to say that we want the kids, in order for them to read, they need to be reading all the time. And we need to foster that love of reading. They should be, you know, asked high order questions and making predictions and discussing characters, but they also should be able to be given additional opportunities just to read independently, something that they want to read. One of the concepts is stop, drop, and read, if you've ever heard of that. That's, you know, just again, finding times for kids that do independent reading on their own. And then they can also turn that around into writing. Also, continue to build a driven data culture at Glenside where the teachers make use of formative and summative assessments, formative meaning the benchmarks, and summative meaning the PSSAs, to determine and inform and reflect upon the effectiveness of their instruction. I believe that Glenside has a culture that it's working toward to build a data culture, but there's plenty of room for growth. And so therefore, this year, one of the things we did is we used the data from the benchmarks and did data protocols and had them actually look at the data and examine it with their teams and say what was working, what was not working. And say, like, and we also had conversations and have been working with common assessments also, but the common assessments that I think are really effective is when the teachers sit down and make their own common assessments with their own grade teams, and then they actually use that assessment to determine whether or not everybody across that grade team met the same criteria, and then adjust their instruction based on that criteria, or the sharing of that criteria, so that, say, for example, one grade team member, maybe we'll say 80% of the kids pass the test, and the other grade team member 40% pass the test. And so therefore that fosters the discussion of why it is this teacher's class did better than the other teacher's class in real time, not waiting for results or scores or PSSA scores. Share and analyze student work at the grade team level also, just to identify best practice instruction. And these are just things that I also 21st century skills, subjects, and themes. And I will say I'm pretty impressed with Glenside's MTSS process. They have a great start with this. There's a firm, I don't think I put it, they're really moving in the right direction. They buy into it. And so therefore they need to keep building on that, adding more interventions, things that they can do to support the children. I forgot to put it, but we also did tutoring, and we provided that to the students. So that was for literacy. And then for math, the real focal point for math was geometry this year at Glenside, but you'll see that the goal up there is similar to the literacy one. It's that 80% of our scholars demonstrate at least 5% growth in multi-digit whole numbers, multi-digit arithmetic, classify shapes by properties of their lines and angles. Again, big focus was geometry. The grade teams met, they decided areas to be addressed. They used the geometry as their own mode goal, which is their own professional development goals. They developed flexible implementation of the Envisions program based on student need and instructional opportunity. The Envisions program is a really great program. It provides a lot of opportunities for fluency in mathematics, but it doesn't provide everything. So the teachers do actually look outside and try to supplement what they can to try to support the Envisions program. If there's something missing, they've been putting things in just to support the kids. Teachers at grade levels have been introduced their students to geometry to help overall geometry knowledge in school-wide, incorporated geometry group activities and even in our morning meetings. Teachers consistently planned and worked on multi-digit whole numbers, multi-digit arithmetic, and they also utilized anchor charts, especially in geometry, and concept skills were reinforced with games and online practice. The results were that in third grade, oh, did I miss one? Oh, I do have one here, sorry. Okay, concept skills were reinforced. Okay, number sense was also utilized. Math warm-up, IXL teachers were able to introduce geometry in their daily instruction. And again, the MTS and also higher order problems, and also the MTSS process was again implemented with fidelity. For math, numbers, and operations, 69% of our students grew by 5% or more, 4% grew by 3 to 5%, and 5% grew by 0 to 3%. And that means a total of 78% of our students had positive growth. Again, very close to our goal, but not quite making it completely. In geometry in third grade, you can see a big disparity between geometry in third grade and fourth. 81% grew by 5%, 1% grew by 3 to 5%, 4 grew by 0 to 3%, meaning a total of 86% of our students made some kind of positive growth in third grade in geometry. So that focus really worked in that area. For fourth grade, math and numbers, 60% grew by 5%, 3% by 3 to 5%, and 4 grew by 0 to 3% for a total of 67% between the two benchmarks. And then in geometry, and you see the disparity there between the two grades, 50% grew by 5% or more, 3% by 3 to 5%, and 5% by 0 to 3%. There could be many factors to that. There are 2 different grade levels. There's also 2 different skill sets. We'll have to see how this, pans out with the PSSAs themselves. And again, 68% of our students had positive growth. So as I said before, what I did here, and it's pretty much the same thing from before, it's just really giving you more of a summary again of where we saw the most improvement and where we also saw where we need the most improvement. And with the fourth grade, their scores were slightly lower than the third grade. So 86% of our students had positive growth with geometry, and 78 in third grade, and then 78% of our students had positive growth with math, numbers, and operations. In fourth grade, math, numbers, and operations, there was 67% growth, and then 58% positive growth in geometry. So what does that mean as far as what we're going to do? What are our next steps? Continue to add new lessons to supplement the Envisions program, which I spoke of earlier. Topics For geometry, all need to continually be considered as far as prerequisites. Increase focus on perceptual understanding and procedural fluency. And for those who, if you did perceptual understanding, I mean, conceptual understanding is that the children need to know what what multiplication is. They need to know not just that 3 times 2 equals 6. They need to understand the concepts behind it. And procedural fluency is they need to know 6 different ways to do that multiplication problem. So they are not thinking of just one way of doing it, but they're doing it multiple ways. Kind of like building a toolbox, where if they have that toolbox, they can apply to other math aspects. Continue to build a data-driven, and last but not least, also math automaticity. I know that folks don't always agree. This is coming from me. I know folks don't always agree with drilling, but the fact of the matter is, if a kid knows his multiplication tables, is like the kid knowing his alphabet. And therefore he can use the, I'll say, energy in his brain or her brain to actually do the math problem rather than worrying about that 2 times 3 equals 6. Or trying to do something on their fingers or something like that. That automaticity can actually help them later on. Share and analyze student work at grade team meetings. Continue to build on the multi-tiered system, which I spoke of before, and then the 21st century skills. That's what I got. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm gonna open it up to questions from the board. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation of the way you presented the results. It's very clear, what you were targeting and what the ranges are. Does just the 0 to 5% range being 16%, that is an indication for, just as an example, that is an indication though that there's 32% that showed negative.
Yes.
Or did not show negative growth, correct? What would it take? I don't have too much context in terms of, is that an expected number? Is that a success? I mean, I know that wasn't part of the goal, but I would imagine that our target would be 100% showing at least on track.
In progress.
Right.
And I would agree with you. I mean, from what I understand with this whole process with the school improvement plan, this is just the beginning of what you all put in place. So this one can serve as, we'll say a baseline.
Yes.
For future years. It is showing progress, just not where we would want it to be. And I think that that's something also that needs to be compared with the PSSAs, that if you were to look at the scores of the PSSAs, if this is any indication of where we are with our students, then we're actually showing improvement than the scores that were in place last year, which I don't have in front of me right now.
Thank you. And by the way, I should have prefaced with, this is not judgment. I understand. It's a snapshot.
See, I mean, progress is progress.
Right.
Okay, and so therefore, and you also have to keep in mind that this is not just, we're going to say the students that are in the regular ed classroom. This is also the students who were identified with IEPs. And we were just doing the numbers yesterday. I think like Glenside has 20% of the students have IEPs. And so therefore that's something else we have to keep in mind. And actually something we always should really celebrate, especially if those kids are making the progress we want them to make.
And so, as we, and also after everyone presents, I have some higher level meta, like continuous improvement of the continuous improvement process kinds of questions. But I appreciate that this is a starting benchmark, and maybe in future years, part of the goal will be, we want to see 100% showing at least, the 0%
Exactly.
progress. I guess that, and the question in my mind, which I'm not going to ask because it's a huge question, is what would it take structurally to achieve a goal like that? And I'm not actually asking that, but that to me is sort of like the multi-million-dollar budget question that hopefully we're all thinking about, because it does seem like at the end of the day, we want to get to the point where we are at that baseline and are.
I mean, there's different philosophies on this.
Understood.
And I do speak to that in here, just the fact that you really need a data-driven community
Right.
that is looking at, the progress the kids are making or lack thereof progress, and being able to, in real time, that's why I said something earlier about the common assessments, but to be able to work with your team and say, this worked, or this didn't work, Or despite my best efforts, some teachers go in and they think they did an amazing lesson, knocking it out of the park, and then you test the kids and the kids don't pass the test. There has to be that point where the teacher says, okay, what am I going to do differently now to actually now reach the kids? And what if one of my colleagues did something just slightly differently and they had that conversation and now they can turn that around and reteach that lesson real quick to get the kids up the par before it becomes ingrained in them. Because one of the things, if a kid's not learning how to do something, especially in math, and then they keep reinforcing the wrong way of doing it, it's very hard to get them to pull back and say that their process is not working. But the goal again is really based on data itself to weigh in to say, did it work? Or despite my efforts, it didn't work, and what am I going to do differently?
Thank you. A last question, and this is also, I think, applies to pretty much, it's a higher level question, but the disaggregated data in terms of race by race outcome is in Cheltenham in particular, super important
Mhm.
because I don't know if 68% progress means 95% of our white students had progress, but we are failing our students of color
Right.
more at a greater rate. So we need to, and I imagine y'all are looking at that, but I do think that that's important to keep laser focused on, because historically, that has been the exact story, is that baked into the data when you pull it apart.
When we do our end of year report, after all the state assessments are done, that information will be disaggregated. This is benchmark to benchmark, so
Sure.
I did not have them go to that degree because it's only one snapshot at a time. But our end of the year report, once we have the information prior to starting next year, hopefully we'll have it. Or no, more than likely it'll be our October report
Correct.
when you will see all of those results disaggregated by students.
Thank you very much. And that's it. Thanks a lot.
Can I just add one to your, not your last question, but the one before that, in terms of measuring progress, and that we are looking at 2 snapshots of time. And so there is a long period of time, and then it's the endurance of students to be able to take a CDT, which is lengthy. And so I think if we were to break that down and look at common assessments, we're going to see that progress for a larger number of students than we are seeing in these 2 data points. So I think it's important to recognize that, it is just 2 data sets that we're comparing, and they're large tests that cover all content. The way the CDT, just briefly, the way the CDT is designed is that it will ask students questions across the whole range of a grade level, and it will adjust based on the success or failure of the students to answer questions. And so it may adjust up for some students and adjust down for other students. So it does give us a lot of information that we're still learning how to utilize. And so we do need to have those short cycle assessments, the common assessments based on topics targeted on the instruction that teachers are given for us to see the progress that students are making.
Which is used through the professional learning communities, which are your team of teachers that disaggregate and then make a determination of what instructional adjustments need to be made. So it's all cyclical.
Understood. That's really helpful context. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. Any questions from the administrator?
So one thing, before Mr. Griffin steps down, because this will probably be his last time in front of you as a board, I do want to recognize just what he's done as a guest principal with keeping us where we actually are at Glenside for half of a year. And Dr. Robinson now will be coming back to a situation where the work is continuing to move the right direction. So I just wanted to acknowledge that publicly and thank you for coming out of retirement to serve us in this capacity.
Session check, Dr. Riley. Nobody online with questions?
There is nothing in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm very, very excited about the way we're growing together at Myers. It's always been a place where we love the children. We see them as individuals, believe in them, encourage them, respect and appreciate our differences. But I feel like we're going a lot deeper as a staff as relates to seeing them as academic individuals, different learning styles, different strengths, different weaknesses, and how we can scaffold and change our instruction in order to meet their individual needs. So how we are coming together as a staff cohesively in order to accomplish that, as grade teams, as MTSS teams, as a school building, as a Title I, special education, all working collectively, is really exciting. And I believe it's reflected in the direction that we're heading as a school. I always look for at least one little bright point in each day. Many days it's full of sunshine, but some days there are, days where you have to kind of look a little deeper to find. So I can remember two of my more recent small points of just smiles are when we do our new and good or kudos or shares in our team meetings. And it was about data and how a kid has grown from this place to this place, or walking down the stairway and hearing the teacher say, "My goodness, I can't believe this kid is at a queue. I have to keep testing them at the next level in order to see their progress." Or even in a meeting, a pre-formal I had today, a teacher designing an assessment before the lesson in order to determine the next steps. So I'm confident in the direction that we're growing as a school as it relates to the comfort that we're, our comfort level with data, which can sometimes be intimidating to teachers, can sometimes be a little off-putting because of it might point out things that need to grow, and sometimes everyone can't handle that, but I'm very positive. I'm very excited about how we're talking about data. So I'll apologize in advance. Colors help me process. So if you see green and red, it makes it very simple for me. Green is progress, red is not in most cases. So our goal was identified for literacy and math based upon historical data and previous knowledge of areas that students in 3rd and 4th grade struggle. So we identified the skills of informational text key details, specifically informational as opposed to literacy at our school. And in 3rd and 4th grade for math, we utilized numbers and operation. And we used as our metric, the CBT, as everyone else did, which as Dr. Rowley described, titrates and differentiates to the kids' progress and their performance. So it is not necessarily a benchmark where it's everything at one grade level and telling you how I'm doing according to a particular grade standard, but it titrates and takes us where we need to go. We like that because it also gives us the instructional feedback that we need of where we need to go with that child. So it will tell us whether we need to go to 2nd grade, 1st grade with skills, support, and so on, and teachers are using that with fidelity in order to guide their instruction. Some of the things that are in our school improvement plan centered around structuring opportunities to have that collaborative discussion and creating, I use the word safe environments where people feel comfortable sharing with one another, sharing best practices, increasing our use of differentiation, which is one of those academic buzzwords, but we're able to kind of chisel away at some of the words like organic or those words that just kind of are thrown out there and kind of dig deeper as a team to see what those things actually mean. We're using the gradual release format of instruction in an effort to gradually release responsibility of teaching of the learning from the teacher to the student and increase opportunities for students to be engaged meaningfully as the lesson progresses. We meet frequently in our PLC data meetings. I'm really excited about the honing of the MTSS process that we're working on as a school. And to me, that is just putting everyone who is in contact with that kid and bringing all the expertise that is in the building in order to meet the individual needs of that student, utilizing all the resources that we have available. Increasing feedback, meaning that like all of my colleagues were in classrooms, trying to make sure that we are bringing our expertise, making sure that the things that we are trying to do as a school and as a staff in order to support our students is actually taking place, and it is. And then just creating a school-wide culture related to data. That is the biggest part for me. Students are coming up to me with little index cards. I met my typical growth. I met my stretch growth. And teachers are they're sending them. And I'm just getting, hey, the cafeteria kids are just coming up to me. And I'm excited about it because the ownership for growth is not just something that I possess, not something that just parents or teachers possess, but students are internalizing it and they're taking ownership as well. That is reflected in our growth. I think we're doing a good job. I won't say great. The reason I feel like we're doing a great job, but great for me doesn't mean that we've achieved it. I think it means that we're making progress. We're going in the right direction. We have a clear hold of some of the right ingredients that we know are in the winning recipe. And I feel like we are open-minded, collaborative, and forward-thinking as it relates to how we can continue to better our practice and improve student outcomes. So that's the great part, I think, about what we're doing now that we've reached some sort of plateau. As you'll see from the data, there are some positive things happening that are reflected in areas in our current plan that we want to continue to enhance, are using that data to drive instruction. And just kind of talking about what that looks like throughout the day in my planning, in my whole group planning, my small group planning, during my win time, in my discussions with my colleagues. How do I bring data to an MTSS meeting? How do I discuss data with parents? All of those things. Providing in my small group instruction that is skill-based, just what that kid needs, a strategy to go along with it, and then kind of knowing how to scaffold them towards mastery of that lesson goal, or to add prerequisite skills, or to enhance and enrich that child based upon what their performance is. And we want to ensure maximum engagement and meaningful thinking. And we have a lot of discussions about what engagement looks like. We want to continue to enhance that. Engagement is not just doing. Engagement is thinking meaningfully, offering questions, thinking inquisitively, applying learning. So how do we do that as a school, and how can we enhance that as a teaching staff? That's what we hope to continue based upon some of the things we saw in our results. Next slide, please. Again, I apologize for the colors. It's helpful to me. When we talk about the CDT, and which was the metric that we utilized to emphasize growth or to measure growth in our two key areas for 3rd and 4th grade. You'll see here that this is literacy, informational text, key ideas and details. The CDT has blue, it has green, and then it has red. Red, green, and blue. And you'll see that if we were to look at our scale scores, we saw an increase of 83 points. But as I look at the achievement categories, if we measure how students were performing in these areas on the CDT in the fall as opposed to the winter, we saw that in the fall, only 6% were scoring in that blue or highest category, up to 18%. So we were able to reach our goal. And you can see likewise for the fall in that green category, 34 to 48. And I added, one of the questions that you had was how are African-American students or students our non-white students performing, and A stands for African-American students, and we're seeing that not just our African-American students are growing at a rate equal to their peers, but our students in special education, our students in Title I, we see growth across the board, which I think speaks to our process and how we're trying to grow as a community and work collaboratively and utilize processes such as data meetings and MTSS meetings in order to address the total child. Likewise, we see growth of 66 points for our 4th grade as it relates to informational text and key ideas, and we see some growth as well. As we look at our categories below, of course, we see 20% of students scored in the blue category, from 8 to 28%, which is a 20% increase, 50 to 44. That dropped, but I want to kind of focus on that bottom category. You'll notice that we went from 42 to 28. Those students had to go somewhere. Though we did not necessarily reach our goal in that particular green, where you'll see, hey, we went from 50 to 70. When our goal as we look at students is not for everyone to be proficient. When we look at instruction and we look at education, I look at it in a vertical format as opposed to just horizontally, how a student does in a particular grade in a particular year. We're looking to close gaps, so we're looking at from K to 12. So when I look at the gaps here, I'm not just looking at how many students are performing proficient or advanced. I'm looking at how many students also we move from the lower categories up into the higher categories, which means we're not only raising the top, but we're bringing up those students that were performing a little bit lower than their peers. So we were able to take the number of students performing in that lowest category from 42% down to 28%. And then again, below, you'll see that we've had some success as it relates to our students our African-American students as well. I think part of that success is reflected in how we approach our areas of needed improvement. Well, we know we need to address the hearts, the minds of the children. We need to see them as individuals, appreciate their differences. We know that that translates to seeing them as individuals academically, as it relates to how they learn, how they think, what they need, what they know already, where they are. But I feel like as we kind of narrow in on what were the trends that we saw in first grade, forming a culture that allows us to see the specific skills that a student needs to focus on, as opposed to just kind of saying, hey, you grew, that's great. Or you didn't do well. All right, let's just make sure you work harder, or let's try again, or let me repeat it to you again slower, or let me just pull you with 2 other students and say the same thing I said the first time. We found that looking at data in a more detailed fashion allows us to target what we're doing. So these are the areas, and you'll notice that when we're talking about 3rd grade and 4th grade, focus skills related to informational text and key details. And the areas that we struggled with were the areas that I saw that we performed at the lowest grade level. So I know that as related to asking and answering questions, such as who, what, where, when, and why, and how, that in these areas, we performed at a 1st grade level, that was a trend, that was an area that we could focus on in order to improve. That does not mean that all students performed at that level. That doesn't mean that it was everyone that struggled on the assessment struggled on these types of questions. But it was a large enough, they were a large enough area of focus that we were able to use that as a starting point to dig deeper into the data to inform our instruction as to what were the areas. If you were to say, well, why didn't they do well? What did they struggle on? We're trying to have those sorts of conversations where we're able to narrow it down to the skill so that we can teach that skill in a different way. We can teach it based upon their learning style. We can teach it based upon what prerequisite skills they might need in order to even access that grade level standard. And we can also just dig deeper. That's the type of conversation that we're having. And we try to use data as that focus. In addition to those areas, 4th grade had an additional area that they struggled with, which was describe the connection between a series of events, concepts, or steps in a procedure within a text. So these are just some of the areas as it relates to ELA that I know are target areas. And because we look at the data all the time, there might be 20 standards on a sheet as I print out if I were to look at all of the data for 4th grade. And I might say, well, what were the standards how do we perform on this test to give us the scores that equal this blue, green, and this red? There are some skills that the students are at 8th grade level and 7th grade level, depending upon the students, and 6th grade level, even though they're in 4th grade. But this also gives us an idea of how some students might be performing at those lower levels to target our instruction. Our next steps, and they're similar to what I've said before, it's just really the mindset around how we approach data and see our teaching of the total child includes the use of data in a strategic way in order to kind of help that student progress. And as I said earlier, it is translating to the child. So our differentiated instruction, looking at how can we utilize the entire instructional block. If we have a 90-minute literacy block or 120-minute literacy block, how can we utilize the time in that block in order to maximize student engagement and relevant tasks that allow them to apply, think meaningfully, and think critically about the lesson content, as opposed to listening to the teacher or hearing things that are above their grade level. So we look at the time that's spent and how much time is spent on grade level material, and how can we structure it to meet the kids that are beyond grade level, on grade level or below, so that they are spending more time engaging with content that is at their level to maximize their thinking time and to make it relevant and applicable to them, as opposed to just following the book with none of the teachers. In addition, our PLC meetings where we meet weekly have a structured agenda when we talk about a variety of things that are school-wide in order to keep us on the same page as any other school would do. But we also are intentional about disaggregating and at least keeping us on the same page as it relates to our major data points school-wide. So when we talk about data, yes, in first grade level meeting or first grade PLC, yes, we're talking about first grade data, but I'm also using it as an opportunity to inform them about what else is happening in the school academically in other grades, as well as what is happening in our school as it relates to behavior and culture. And as you said, there are a lot of factors that go into whether a kid can be successful in the classroom and reach those targets that we have for them. It's not as cut and dry as if we just do this, they will do this, because, you know, we're dealing with people and not just numbers or robots. Increasing targeted feedback. I mentioned the feel and the discussion and the embracement of data, and I feel like our mindset towards data and how receptive the communication is when I utilize data in our school, and I talk about it with teachers, whether it be individually or in a group, and how teachers bring that data to me and we discuss it, is really ripe at this point. And we're able to kind of grow together as we kind of learn to use it in a meaningful way. You know, statistics can be interpreted in many different ways, and it's not how many data points you have, it's how you use the data points that are most relevant. So narrowing that focus down so we can move forward. And then that school-wide culture. If we can go to math, it's very comparable.
I don't know if I have your math slides, because we just had 2 slides for each school. Are they in your,
Yep, I have them
the
here.
shared one?
For our math, we focused on, while you're pulling them up, I'll just.
Yeah, you keep talking. On
For our math, we focused on numbers and operations. For the same reason in 3rd and 4th grade, there are areas of usually struggle or needed focus or emphasis based upon, you know, historical data and what we know about 3rd and 4th graders. So we saw similar growth. When it does come up, you'll be able to see that our students have made growth that met our benchmark targets of 10 to 12%. But the bigger thing is why and how, and that's what I'm most optimistic about. Again, you'll be able to see the green, the blue, the green, and the red, as well as whether we went up or we went down. But I think most relevant is as we look at our areas of needed improvement, we're able to disaggregate that data grade-wide in those 2 grades and see those specific skills that we need to focus on in order to target them in whatever way is needed for those individual students. And again, all the students don't need help in a particular skill because it's listed, but it gives us a roadmap and it gives us an overall trend that teachers might be able to utilize to find commonality in how they can approach delivering instruction. For our next steps, it's similar to a lot of my colleagues. I love the knowledge is always in the room, and I love listening to them. They help sharpen me as we kind of sharpen each other throughout the school year. And I think that as it relates to Myers, one of the most prominent next steps is how can we best utilize the win period and enhance it a little bit more or think deeper during that time. That is really a blessing because it is a time where, as you know, no new instruction takes place, where students are getting what they need in each area of the building. And on slide 3. If we can enhance that as it relates to planning, as it relates to maybe working across classrooms. An example of that would be if we have 3 first grade classrooms, we're able to look at the data as a grade level team. How can we work together collaboratively across classrooms to move students to focus on specific topics, to allow teachers to plan more in a more in-depth way in order to meet the needs of students, not just in their classroom, but across the grade. So that win period is an area that is ripe for thinking and brainstorming and digging deeper. As my colleague said, the summer learning opportunity with the Systems of Central Office and targeting what students are in need of further supports, in addition to tutoring and collaborating with groups like Right at School. I think that as we look at our PLC meetings, continuing, you'll see I wrote continue. And it doesn't mean because we think we have it in that area, but we believe that we at least know that those ingredients are what we need in this recipe, and we're still adding and we're still tweaking and we're still taking away. But the crux and the core of what we're doing as relates to collaboration, utilizing our resources, pulling them together, knowing the individual child, and continuing our not only whole school, grade level, but individual teachers' uses of data is the direction that we would like to move. Before I move on, you can see that comparable to the ELA slides, in the middle there are areas of needed improvement. I was able to kind of look at the data for the entire grade, and you'll see that in 3rd grade, there was a large emphasis on deficit skills as related, There was a large emphasis on these particular skills performing at a second grade level. That doesn't mean that all the children were there, but it's an example of how I can look at the grade level trends and see that these were some of the areas where students might need to be scaffolded forward or have some prerequisite skills that allow them to compose and decompose numbers within 19, add and subtract within 1,000. Well, add and subtract within 1,000, you might need to learn how to do a skill that was prior to that. In order for you to do that, you might need more work with place value. You might need more work with a variety of skills. Utilizing the data as Dr. Riley has helped us to disaggregate the data, and Dr. Smith allows us to be more confident in supporting teachers, and teachers are more confident in using it to drive their instruction. So that's.
Thank you, Mr. Lidle. Thanks very much. Any questions from the board?
This is really more of a comment and observation. And thank you very much for presenting this data the way that you did. It's very helpful. One thing I'm always reminded of, and as a board, we sit and we are also, very focused on data. I remind myself every time we're asking questions about data that behind each data point is a child, right? And I think what I heard in your presentation is that that is very thoughtfully thought of in terms of progress and growth. And I like the idea of PLCs being utilized for that collaborative teacher discussion about students. I think that that's probably as meaningful as the instruction that goes on in the classrooms. So I wanted to just make that comment because that was very clear, I think from everyone's presentation, but I think as the board dives into the data, which does give us a story, right? Gives us a picture. It's not the complete picture. So that was just a comment.
No, you.
Oh,
you're- I just said you can comment.
I appreciate actually that you went first because some of what you mentioned, thank you for the presentation as well. So some of what you mentioned was like the conditions of like the values of seeing the child behind the number, right? Learn different learning styles. So that's an example of how clearly you're modeled the way, right? In terms of the values, the culture that you want to see, the extent that you're modeling what that looks like, and also, like you put it, enabling others to act in terms of the teachers, how do they own it in different ways. What would you say are some of the other conditions that are important in building that culture of where this data is embraced and informing decisions?
Well, I think like Dr. Scriven and Dr. Smith and Dr. Riley, we all talk about it. We, in my college, we talk about it as well, how to make sure that we are in those classrooms. I think knowing that if you see me every day, then you're not surprised when you see me. And then if you see me every day, then we're talking every day. And if we're talking every day, then we're having conversations that are based upon instruction. We're having conversations based upon how your kids are doing. We're having those type of things and building that trusting relationship where I am not a principal on a perch. But that we all know the kids, that we're all working together. Yes, there's a absolute measure of accountability. There's absolutely expectations. There's absolutely guidelines of what should be done and what should not be done. But to just make sure that we are familiar and we are part of a community is one of the biggest parts. Data, historically, data is seen as something that can be used to identify a deficit area. But when we make it about the kids and not about the individual, we're able to use it as a tool to move forward. So I think I use that word culture all the time, but the culture around data and how we think about it and talk about data and how we use it as to measure growth, not just achievement, and how we can appreciate a child that moves from, in fourth grade, moving from a first grade reading level to a second grade reading level, as much as we appreciate a kid who scored proficient or advanced. Those types of beliefs and that type of thinking is what builds that trust in that culture. So that culture is the biggest thing that I see as effective. And as I said before, it's not just teacher, it's not just parent, it's not just principal. When the students grab a hold of it, we see the most success.
Any other questions, Mr. Adams?
As a point of clarity, with your presentation, we are looking at growth within certain categories. Like in terms of like the blue, green, red, like how many grew within that which is proficient, advanced.
Yes.
Below basic and so forth.
Yes, on that specific standard.
Oh, that's just, yeah.
Skill.
Yeah, so as a point of clarity, as we were looking at growth up to this point, it's just been, not just, because I don't want to, like, that's not just little growth, because growth is growth. But we've been looking at it in terms of no matter where you are along the proficient, advanced, we've been looking at just growth in terms of percentage. So if you, right? As a point of clarity, like the other presentations, it's slightly different for this presentation, right? As a point of clarity.
What I tried to do was measure where we started. No matter where you started, I wanted to know how many students we had performing in each of those categories. And of course, the goal is to get as many students to performing at proficiency or a distinguished level as possible. But that first benchmark reflected by the fall showed us how many students scored on these specific skills in that area. And then we just measured the change in those specific scoring categories. And they range from 2 to 600 to 2 to 832, 832 to whatever it might be, and then that highest level. So what is the movement? Similar to what you, and I'm using this very loosely, similar to how the PSSA classifies student performance into below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced, the CDT classifies their performance in red, green, and blue. And then we look at how many kids scored proficient or advanced on the PSSA. Likewise, we can look at how many students scored at red, green, and blue, and the movement of those students between those categories is reflected as it is on the PSSA.
I thank you for that explanation. And when we talk about growth in terms of 67% of students grew from 0 to 5%, that's anywhere along the spectrum, right? This is really just a point of clarity. I'm not trying
Yes,
to,
yes.
it's just a point of clarity.
I can't say yes. I didn't.
Do you mean in any of those categories?
Any of those categories, yes. That's growth
It was
along
growth
any of those
based
categories.
based on the school improvement plan, we'll say goals. That they were the items that we focused on.
But yes. Dan.
Yes, okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Just specifically, we took every student's initial score in the fall and every student's score in the winter and calculated what percent growth did each student have. Right?
I get the
So
math.
regardless of where
Yeah.
At a basic level.
This is
I get the math of it. Yeah. I'm just told, we're looking at technically two different measures of growth as we think about what we're looking at Myers and technically what we saw for the others.
But just so you know, the teachers and we can drill down from that information to actually affect instructional practices. So therefore, we can actually get to the point where we're saying, okay, this is the one skill that we need to work on.
I get that too. It's literally just a point of clarity. So just to get to, as we talk about common assessments, right, common way of shared data, that's just really, I could have held this to the end because it's, as we think about school to school, we're talking about growth, but we're talking about growth slightly differently.
Holistically, as
so
so
I'm
to move for category.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really just a matter of us naming it, understanding it, so that we can make, just so that we can process and make informed.
And those are the types of conversations that we have. You know, how do we measure success? How do we measure, a saying in Myers is which is growth, this or this? And we say both. But as adults and as educators, we know we have to look at it. Are we looking at their growth from where they started? Are we looking at it with individual points from category to category, overall growth of points, overall growth of percentage? We have to be able to narrow that down. And we're having those discussions. This is one of those broader areas that we're able to just go from one category to the next in those big silos. So this was helpful at a larger scale. And this is just an example of how we're doing that in each classroom, but looking at the skills and the individual children with these colors and using that, for example, if a kid would have red, blue, or green for a specific skill, then I can utilize that data to form my small groups. And I know that I'm maximizing my time with that child because I'm not teaching them something that they already know. I'm not teaching them something that's 3 years above where they are. I know based upon the data and where they are within these categories, based upon the skill and what grade they are, I can now focus my teaching in that.
And if I could just interject, because I have to say this, and I'm always going to be transparent. This benchmark comparison, don't drill down to the numbers because this is, again, it's a snapshot. What you really should be listening to are the protocols, the practices, the strategic systemic approaches that principals are taking to move the work, right? there's so many variables, as many of you know, that are going to go into what these outcomes are, which is so beyond just this numbers. And we gotta wait till the state assessment to really have a fair analysis of where we stand, where we can start to look at our trend data, especially under my tenure. So this is year 2. So I'll be looking at 2 years worth of trend data to look at incremental growth. I would really say we shouldn't even do these next year around benchmarks. I'm just going to be transparent. It's not yielding the best use of time because the data is so convoluted from the standpoint of the benchmark. And even to your point, based on each school, this could be presented, data can be presented so many different ways. We're just trying to give you guys an overview of the continuous improvement processes that we're really putting into place, which we're continuously revisiting and enhancing. We're getting ready to amp it up again the end of this year for next year in terms of what that's going to look like, which we will present and share. But your points are well taken, just like everyone's, but we can't get fixated on the numbers within this benchmark. Focus on the processes that are or are not happening, right? And how they're varied. That's what we're trying to really norm, those best practices.
And with fairness to that, that's my point in asking, because if we're looking, again, we're using the same language, but measuring it slightly differently across. So it's not about the number, it's really as a process, like so I'm right there with you.
We are, okay. And everyone's at a different level in terms of their leadership style and the cultures that they've created in the schools, right? And that's where my work comes in. So, and that's why I want to try to keep it high level to a certain extent without going way down in the weeds from that standpoint, because then you're kind of stepping on my toes a little bit, not you directly as a board, in terms of what I have to do as the instructional leader, right? So I just have to interject that as politically correct as I can, what the real essence of the meaning of what this is. And this is not something we can do. We can give you more in a different format, which is a conversation I can have with you guys in more detail, not this form. Any more? Go ahead.
Thank you. Any more questions from board members? Any questions from the audience, either here or online? Thank you very much, Mr. Lytle.
Don't run.
So I'm totally impressed that your eyes are not totally closed or glazed over at this point.
We live for these moments.
Do you? Okay, good. There's one that lives for these moments. Thank you for having us tonight. To Dr. Scriven's point just a minute ago around leadership and building culture. This has been my first year in WinCode. And so my leadership style has been to operate out of the 4 L's this year, to be intentional around my listening to my students and my staff, to learn from them, to look around at what's happening, what's going really well and celebrate that, and what needs to be tweaked and improved, and then to embrace all of it with this great sense of love and admiration that I have for the WinCode community. One of the things I often say to teachers after a walkthrough or an informal conversation is, it's become a running joke now. I'll say, I wonder about. So at the faculty meeting the other day, I paused for a minute. And several people said, I wonder what you're wondering about. So that's getting infused into the culture, that there's this inquiry-based model that we're all looking and searching for answers. So to frame how I looked at the SIP this year was really around our below basic students and looking for growth in that reporting category. For our third grade, it was around vocabulary acquisition, and for our fourth graders, it was around craft and structure in reading language arts. And in math, for both third and fourth grade, it was around numbers and operations, which has been a common theme this afternoon or this evening. So one of the important things I think we need to keep in mind is that the story isn't finished yet for this year. We still have a whole reporting set of data to come in that will help put the exclamation point on the story for the year. So the story I'm presenting now is unfinished, and I just need us to keep that in mind. So as I look at our fall benchmarking data, one of the things I was struck with was how early in the academic year that test was given. It was given the first week, almost the second week of school. So one of the things I wanted to do was be intentional about letting our curriculum materials work and our teachers work, and to see what they were doing and how they were implementing curriculum and materials to see if that was working. It is, and that's a very positive statement to make about our resources. One of the things we did this year through Dr. Smith's office is we collaborated with the Penn Literacy Network, and we had some intentional coaching. So I had 5 teachers volunteer to be coached by a Penn Literacy Network expert around and across grade levels, right? Because our curriculum spirals. So what we're doing in kindergarten is what we're doing in 4th grade on a different level. So to begin to introduce those concepts and to get support. So teachers volunteered. 4 teachers volunteered for that. 1 was asked to participate and did so willingly, which was a smart move on their part. And they have thrived under that intentional coaching model. They meet once a month with someone who comes from Penn to observe their lesson. A couple times the coach has actually taught the lesson, has modeled the lesson for the teacher. And then when I go in for a walkthrough, I'm able to see, were they able to get the gist of how that lesson should be implemented. I am a firm believer that small group instruction is the meat of where our instruction needs to happen. That's one of the things I listened and looked for along the way, to discover that there's hasn't historically been a culture of small group instruction. So I began to implement some professional development and faculty meetings about the why. Why is small group instruction important? Why is it my philosophical approach? And why do you need to come along with that approach? So they're, to varying degrees of success, they're coming along with small group instruction, but that's been an important part of the growth that you will see that's happened over this year. We've been very intentional about our diagnostic use of the IXL. Teachers are very comfortable at Wyncote with looking at IXL data. And so I thought, well, let's take them where they're comfortable and build from there. So one of the things we're trying to do is also build a culture where data is important, where data is talked about, where we're comfortable talking about data. And then it's not just me as the leader of the building doing the talk. In February, I think Dr. Smith's office came, Dr. Scriven came for a walkthrough to look at our benchmark data from the winter and how that was also disaggregated. It's not tonight, but I have that information if you want it. And what we did from that was then to move to teacher ownership of the data, to look at specific areas in each grade band that they could work collaboratively on. as a team. And they developed their own protocol. This is what we see as the need, very similar to this improvement model. This is what we see as the need. This is how we're going to address it. And this is how we're going to measure whether we made the progress or didn't. So that sort of grade level data protocol has been an important piece of conversation. To my point, that story is not finished yet, because much of their evaluative component of that objective is really tied to the final benchmark for the year to see their growth. So that building of the data culture has been a little bit of a heavy lift for us. In math, we've also used the diagnostic arena for IXL. So we have a fact fluency program where students who have mastered their facts in a particular operation get a shout out. Our math interventionist has created a lunch bunch group where they do math facts through games. So it's not this, while to Mr. Griffin's point, while skill and drill is terribly important and you have to know your facts with automaticity, there are a variety of ways that we can get to that sense of automaticity. Mrs. Hennessy has developed a program through games to develop fact fluency. After the second benchmark data in early February, we discovered a need for our kids that were on the bubble. So to describe that as right between basic and proficient, they're right there. They just might need a little extra boost. So we developed the Wake Up with Winco program, which met for a period of 6 weeks to focus on very, very, very specific skills and strands that were data-driven. I was delighted that we had 6 teachers participate in the program. The other piece of the culture that we're trying to develop at Winco is that it's not just about the 3rd and 4th grade teachers doing this work, but there are students, right? And so to get out of this idea of, well, I teach kindergarten, it doesn't matter what I do here. We had some kindergarten teachers who were part of this tutoring program, and that was very exciting to see. And it was great for the kids to see and interact with their former kindergarten teacher. So that worked. We met 2 mornings a week. Our teachers were paid from our ESSER funds, thanks to Dr. Smith's office. And our data there showed that our students grew from anywhere from 10 to 70 points on their ISL data just within 6 weeks with targeted, specific, small group and individual instruction. Next slide. So here's the data. Here are the data points using the N counts as well from September to January. You all saw the September data in the original SIP. One of the interesting points to bring out is that, to Mr. Lytle's earlier point, everybody moved. Everybody had to move somewhere. This does not show us the mobility of where kids moved. Linkit has a very specific report that we can get for you if you're interested in seeing that mobility data, but all kids did move. Where do we need to go? Those areas of improvement, those come exactly from the Linkit and CDT benchmark data in January. And again, you see this spiral nature. You see that multiple meaning words and key idea, vocabulary, craft, and structure begin to emerge in 1st grade. So let's start addressing that in 1st grade in an age-appropriate way, so that when we spiral back to comparing and contrasting events in 2nd grade, craft and structure in 3rd and 4th grade, there's already been some previous instruction on that. Math, the skills are around computation, place value, geometry, and again, one of the important things to keep in mind is that the CDT tests skills that students have not necessarily received direct instruction on yet. So when we look at geometry, when we look at measurement, I was in a classroom the other day where they were sort of just beginning this conversation about measurement. I almost had a heart attack because we just finished the PSSAs, and I'm sure measurement was on it, but so be it. So that'll be a conversation we'll have in October. But as I look at next steps, particularly around the end of the year, of course, I want to look with the faculty around our CDT and Linkit scores for the third benchmark. But we're also coming to that magical time of the year where teachers are submitting their individual data for their growth for the year with their school performance measures and their own IEP goals. What have they done specifically to move students within their classroom that they have jurisdiction or responsibility for? So as I'm beginning to see that, it's great fun to see the teachers get excited about the growth that their students have made. So that's building that culture of teacher ownership of data as well. And as we look to 23-24, three things really interesting. One is being much more intentional at Windcode about how we use our team time. I will say, from my perspective, it has not been very effective because we often come to conversations and talk just to talk. What's the purpose of the talk? When you're coming to talk about a student, it's not enough to say, Jim really is not doing well in craft and structure. Okay, what does that mean? What's the data you have to support that? So to look at some protocols with how we can really structure and beef up our PLC time. I'm very interested in looking at the intersectionality between behavior and emotion, emotional regulation, and academic performance. How do they intersect? I know they do. And I think as we're intentional about revamping our MTSS process, that conversation will become much more pointed and focused. Right now, we have MTS at Windcode, at least, we have MTSS conversation over here, which is a lot about academic. We have PBIS conversation over here, which is a lot about behavior. And for 8 or 9 students at Windcode, there's a distinct correlation between the two. So how can we be very intentional about addressing their tier 2 and tier 3 needs? And then much to Mr. Lytle's point, it's nice to have a thought partner in the room. We'll be looking at our win time. We'll be looking at our win time. So that is the Windcode unfinished story. More to come, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any questions from the board?
No question, just a comment. I wrote down some of the things, the 4 L's, very powerful. And I wonder about, because I was wondering about how you all got together and talked about best practices and, implementing some of those in your own school. So thank you for talking about that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Rutsch?
You mentioned ESSER funds paid for something connected to Wake Up at Windcode. What was that?
The teachers that did the tutoring.
The teacher. Okay,
That's the before school, right?
Correct.
And just for clarity, that's offered to all of our schools before and after school tutoring. That is financed through ESSER as a form of supplanting instructional loss.
Thank you.
It's bedtime. Let's wrap it up.
It's my bedtime. I'm up, right?
You are.
Hi, everybody. As I'm sitting here listening to these presentations, I remember a time in my youth, definitely my youth, where I had a speeding ticket and I went to court. And while I was sitting in court, the judge said, all of you out there, you may want to pay attention to those that become before you, because their story may be better than yours. So I'm Lynn Trombetti, and I am one of the vice principals at Elkins Park, and I am pinch hitting for Dr. Clark, who is unable to be here. And like my time in court, I have heard things here that I'm definitely going to incorporate and bring back to our leadership. You know, the biggest thing that has struck me as I'm listening, and I went through this, and I've spoken to our team preparing for this evening, is the mosaic that our children are. You know, when I first started 27 years ago, I could look at a child and it would be like a twister board. You know, that blue means that they're sad. This green means that they're great in academics. And now it's like, you know, a Monet painting with all the colors swirling together. And it's very hard to pull out, well, this academic is the problem. You know, so much trauma. You know, we've read all of the articles on depression and anxiety on the rise with children. That really was evident when we did the PSSA testing. The number of students that expressed anxiety, parents. And so if they're experiencing it for this, you know, they're also experiencing it in their classroom data. I can tell you this, one of the things that is a predictor of future success, I think, for EP is when I was monitoring the kids that were taking the PSSAs. They were into it, they weren't speeding through it and then turning it in. I had one student who has struggled both behaviorally and academically. He said to me, Ms. Trombetti, I got those math open-ended questions. My teacher made me smart. I was like, great, that's your way to go. But, you know, if we look at our first slide, this is taken directly from our school improvement plan. Our overall improvement plan goal, our SMART goal, was for all of our students to show 5% growth towards proficiency in both ELA and math. Again, to your point, that can look very differently. And I agree with Dr. Scriven in that utilizing the CDT, it is difficult to really just use that data point and say, they're going to be here. One of the things that, if you look at our list, our SIP inflammation steps, we really did PLCs this year and saw really great things happening in them. They are creating common assessments. They are looking at, you know, if I go into team A and I do observations, almost every day I'm seeing similar lessons, if not the same lessons. And they constantly, then they come back and they meet about those lessons, about their quick assessments, and talk about what's happening. And then they make adjustments to the lessons. So, you know, that's a great thing to be seeing. In the second column where we list the action steps, we also look at WIN. You know, WIN has been repeated many times here. It is a great time. It's a 45 minutes. It's actually listed at 50, but between when they get settled and all, they have a solid 40 to 45 minutes instruction. A lot of times before that was clearly defined, it was like a catch-up. You know, and they needed extra help here or there, but we structured it this year around the standards that we identified as needing the most improvement. For our math, for our ELA, both 5th grade and 6th grade, we also looked at informational text. We also then correlated to what that percentage shows on the PSSAs, not teaching to the test, but saying, okay, here's the eligible content that we want to be able to teach. That has stayed the same for the informational text, from main idea to theme, pulling out those ideas and being able to write about them. For math, for our 5th grade, again, it's that numbers and operations, you know, how quickly, you know, where they could come to. And I agreed so much with our colleague from Glenside, when he talked about, you know, how do we get that information in there? And, you know, there is a part on test they can use the calculator, but many of them struggle. You know, a lot of times in my behavior correction interactions with students, we'll do times tables, we'll do different things, and then where they can start to see their growth as well. It's something that my guidance counselor does also. For our math class, it was algebraic concepts. Based on the data that we did see from September to January, we were able to really look at the eligible content for math, with 5th grade being fractions and 6th grades being inequalities, and then variables, dependent and independent. So we then restructure our WIN periods to then design curriculum and activities around that. And the typical WIN period at EP starts with a whole group instruction on one of these topics, utilizing SAS, utilizing released items from DSSA, along with their curriculum textbooks and vision. They will then work as a whole group. Then they have some practice with the teacher kind of circulating, and then we pull a small groups. Our math specialists and our reading specialists also pull groups during that time to really help where those deficits occur. The data provided in the 3rd column is based on the growth shown from our first 2 benchmarks. We're scheduled to take, I didn't hear anybody say this, but we're scheduled to take the 3rd benchmark starting on the 22nd, which is next Monday, and then going through June 8th, I think it's June 8th. And so we'll get that data right as the kids are leaving. Based on this data for the first half of the year in ELA, and we looked at the numbers, because again, we're looking at trying to get everybody to make some progress. We had 133 5th graders, 131 6th graders showed a 5% increase in ELA for proficiency, working towards proficiency. In math, we saw 174 5th grade students and 177 6th grade students show over 5% growth. But again, on the next slide, you'll see the breakdown of how many made 0 to 2%. All right, let's go to the second slide. Well, the first slide illustrates growth based on the data from January. The second slide focuses on the question, are we on target to meet our goal? For ELA, we focused on informational standards for both 5th and 6th grades. In math, as I said, numbers and operation were the focus of our improvement plan, and we addressed the algebraic concepts. We've now been able to, as if you look on that top blocks where we saw in the terms of key details and informational text, really looking at eligible content, again, further drilling down. When we add our 3rd benchmark data to the mix, we're projecting further gains from January to June 2023. One of the positive indicators that we have for growth can be found in our IXL data. We have seen significant growth. If you look at this on the first column, it says, that for the 5th grade, they made 58% growth, made 5%, 58% of our 5th graders made 5% or more, and 75% of our 6th grader students made 5% or more in this IXL growth. In math, our numbers are even greater, so that really makes me excited. It shows that 71% of 5th graders showed a minimum of 5% growth, and 90% of our 6th graders showed a minimum of 5% growth in their overall math level. So again, we're taking this piece of data, we're trying to mix it up and make a great cake. But these are indicators that we are seeing work. And this is the excitement that teachers are talking about in their groups. Like, oh, this child went from here to there. And we are embracing culture. I mean, the culture of data culture. What are our next steps? And again, when you look at the evidence of improvement, the numbers are there in terms of, did we have 100% make more than 5% or no? No, we did not, based on the September to January. But what we are showing is that almost our entire population is showing some sort of growth, which is important. And we take that, now we're going to build upon it and get even higher numbers. So what are we doing? Next steps, we're going to continue with the PLCs. We have them pretty much running on their own. We'll come in and supervise, but they take notes. They have a template that they follow. They're bringing evidence of student work to be able to, really look at the formative and the summative assessments to see where we need to improve upon. As an administrative team, we're continuing to use our walkthroughs to identify what's happening in the classes. And it's very clear as you go from class to class, who's been part of that PLC, who has the buy-in, and who maybe is a lone wolf. And we have to bring him back to the pack, or her back to the pack. We're looking at a big part of what we need to do at EP is our ELL data, looking at our English learners and addressing how we can make sure that they're improving. Because we are a school of improvement where we need to improve with our ELL. Addressing mental health, incorporating SEL, social emotional learning instruction. The MTS process, it's better than it's ever been at our school. We really are having some strong processes and systems being put in place. One of the biggest tools that we've had, and I thank Jessica Keene and wherever, we have a behavior specialist that comes from the IU that sits in on our meetings with us every week and is able to offer suggestions. And he understands, like he's a master at this MTSS process. So has brought a lot of tier 2 interventions. Data collection is not just for special ed students. It goes across the board. And when we collect that data, we correlate it with our PBIS referrals. We look at those who are getting rewards. We see that growth. And then we start to gain a total picture. Knowing their history, knowing who they are will allow them to see greater academic growth. This summer, we're using the 4th grade teacher input to really look at where the 4th grade students are with the data that we have available and to start to put them in groupings because our win is going to be even stronger next year. And so if the 4 of us are really struggling with multiplication, we're going to take a look at that group and target where they are. A lot of time, heterogeneous, love it. Wouldn't live without it. It's great in our classrooms, but for some of this intervention work and to be able to move students, having them and being able to meet them where they are is great. And then allowing that differentiation to take place in the classroom and through their lessons. We're also taking a look at our special ed delivery model this year. Dr. D, Jackie D, as I call her, because I can never pronounce this poor woman's last name. She's our supervisor for EP. She's a supervisor for AS, and then she's been with us helping improve our practices. Really taking a different role, allowing teachers to be experts in their areas, and allowing students to not just be pigeonholed into you're on this team, this is what you get. So we're looking at changing that model. We're definitely moving upward. I feel positive at EP. There's a lot of growth in many areas that we continue to need to look at. Our teaching staff is energetic and they're buying in. They're listening to it. They're not just, a lot of times in the 27 years I've been here, we floated things out and they've just kind of looked at me. Now they're engaged, they're talking amongst each other when I'm not there just to make it look good. So I'm really have been impressed this year. Thank you so much for allowing me to present.
Thank you.
Thank you for your 27 years.
27 years. In 2 months, I'll have done 28. But I'm not counting. What questions do you have for me?
Any questions from the board?
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everybody doing? So I'm Craig Metcalf. I'm the principal at Cedarbrook. I normally have long stories also, but not tonight. I promise you, I could beat Jason's 20 minutes if I wanted to. All right?
Mine was nice. Yeah.
So to get right to the data, our SMART goals around English, math, and science were pretty much the same. Last year, we, as Dr. Riley talked about, we had native data, and then we had data that was more related to like around PSSA data, which would be talking about distinguished, proficient, basic, below basic. Our native data was more about below grade level, and above grade level. So last year we focused more on moving children from basic to proficient. This year we wanted to flip that because we know we're not going to really move kids the way we want to move them unless we move them from below grade level. And so for all three of our tested subject areas, the goal was to decrease the number of scholars who are performing below grade level by 10% from our first benchmark to our third benchmark. And then we had out of the three subject areas, we did have some focus areas. So for English, it was key ideas and details and craft structure around literature and informational texts. For math, our focus was ratio and proportions, expressions and equations, functions, geometry, and number systems. It seems like a lot, but we have a reason why we chose those. And for science, the focus area was biological and physical science. The reason why we chose those areas primarily was because when we looked at the PSSAs, those are the highest percentages that count, in mass for the PSSA. So we wanted to make sure we're targeting the areas where we get the most amount of opportunity to score points and perform well on. When it comes to our implementation of our school improvement plan, I think everyone's talked about this is now my second year at Cedar Brook, when I came in the first year, we made some implemental changes with our WIN schedule. Again, just looking to always deconstruct and make things better. This year we went with a different approach. And that approach was really around how the children go to the class. And so last year they may have had 6 different WIN teachers, right? This year we gave them a main WIN teacher that met with them 3 days out of the week. And then the other 3 days or other 3 days out of our 6-day cycle was a math teacher, their English teacher, their science teacher, right? And so on those days, they received more direct instruction in their WIN group versus the other days was more them being on IXL, right? So they're getting like key focused instruction on the topics here that we focused on or we're talking about. In addition to that, with our WIN schedule, this year, again, we made some changes. We also, utilizing our schedule, manipulating it to our advantage, we're able to free up some teachers. We can have small group instruction during our intervention periods, right? And so we're talking about teachers having maybe 8 to 10 kids, where they can focus on certain skills. And last year, again, we were looking at kids who were going like from basic, trying to push them proficiency. This year, again, we looking for kids or children who were below grade level, right? And really focusing on how we can push them from below grade level to grade level or above. Our data protocols. So I would definitely say during our PLCs, we have been very consistent even from last year around our data protocols. Whenever we have PLC meetings, especially for our 7th grade math team, they, I would say, are much further advanced than our other PLCs with regards to their common assessments. And their conversations almost always evolve around, looking at common assessments. What questions do the children not perform well on? How do we revamp that? How do we re-ask that question? And then comparing their data amongst each other to see if the questions were good questions or weren't good questions. And then seeing if they have to go back and reteach. So they are the model in our school. And so one of our goals this year was to really increase the amount of common assessments that are occurring across all 3 of our subject areas. With regards to data protocols, so once our teachers took benchmarks, our scholars took benchmarks, our teachers actually in their or on their time, we gave them a vamped data protocol sheet in which they had to really dig into their data even more. So one of the things and privileges we've had were around these navigator reports that come from Linkit. It does a really deep dive. And so I know people talked about, if you guys want to see some data, we can show you some data, okay? But it allows teachers to really dig in even further. And when I say we ask some really tough questions, every teacher that when they returned their data protocol sheet back to us, we looked at every single one and gave them all feedback on it to make sure they knew that we were looking at it, right? And so that I think was really helpful for our teachers. Another thing that was helpful also, social studies is not a tested area, but we got our socialist teachers sit down with our English teachers to do the data so they also could see where they can help within their subject, primarily around informational text. Talked about small group instruction already. Our MTSS process, I think this year has been, I thought we did a good job last year, but this year we've done a much better job following through and monitoring our 2-week progresses that we might establish for a child, right? So if a scholar, was a child that came in where we had some concerns about, we put a plan together, we really monitored the following 2 weeks of where that scholar went and then implemented either more interventions or removed them from our intervention plan because they met the goal. So that's something we did a much better job of this year. Like I said, I thought we did a decent job last year, but this year I think it's very impressive. Our mentoring programs have also been very supportive. As you know, coming back still, COVID is still something that's very prevalent. Where our children are still doing some type of recovery from because they missed a year and a half of learning, right? Missed a year and a half of just socializing and learning how to, be the scholars we want them to be. And so having those mentoring programs, Make the Distinction, our Beacon program, they've been very supportive of trying to re-engage our scholars' social and emotional needs around, school culture, just around how to interact with their peers, how to interact with adults. So that's been very helpful. We've done college tours, things of that nature. So that's been a really great opportunity for children to just step outside of school also and see things a little bit from a larger picture. One of the things I'm most proud of are AFAs, which is Advocacy for All. It actually encouraged our teachers to get ahead of us, and they were sharing our scholars' data with them well before we had that chance to have the conversation, right? And so after every benchmark this year and before the PSSAs, Advocacy for All really is us meeting the administrators and counselors, and Peggy Cooper, who's our librarian, she's amazing as well. And some of our teachers, we met with every single child in our entire school and had a one-on-one conversation, right? And so they get an opportunity to have someone different speaking to them about their school data, but they also get an opportunity to just answer questions and feel comfortable with, with their administrators who normally are coming in to look at instruction from the teachers, but now we're having this conversation about their data points and things they want to do in life. So it's not just about data, but it's about making those connections as well. So I'm really proud of that. And the fact that children were able to see their actual data, all of our teachers set goals, with their scholars from where they were to what they want to, meet for that next time around. So whether you were the very lowest of below grade level to the very highest of above grade level, they still had a goal to set for themselves. I've already talked about common assessments, and then our restructuring our academic seminar class. So academic seminar is primarily for our students who are in need of specialized services. And so we really structured that around how do we ensure that not only are we targeting the needs of the children, but also keep it kind of lockstep with what they're learning in class, right? I think that's important. And sometimes I think that gets lost. And so while they may, get some of the things they need for themselves personally, they're not getting the opportunity also to kind of build on what's happening in the classroom. I think that's important. I think sometimes we don't necessarily focus on doing both of those, we're focusing on one. And so we rearranged our time for academic seminar class to ensure that our scholars who are in need of specialized services are getting those both hand in hand. Our MODE projects, our SPM and our IP goals, all those focus around our 10% from benchmark 1 to benchmark 3. We wanted to make sure every teacher in the school had the same exact objectives that we had collectively, right? And so they're being evaluated on with their SPMs and IEP goals, as well as their MODE projects around those 10% improvements from below grade level from benchmark 1 to benchmark 3. So evaluation of our results, just a couple areas just to go over quickly. Staff, they use data protocols to compare benchmark data. That was one area of how staff were able to assess themselves. Common assessments, again, during our PLCs, teachers are using the common assessments and looking at data protocol sheets to make those areas of improvement and adjustments. Again, as I talked about the 2-week student progress monitoring for our MTSS plans, walkthroughs as always, we have a chart that kind of tracks how many we do each week. We have conversations around those, and when we have teachers who are struggling, we're able to meet and kind of talk to each other about, well, hey, maybe you need to get into this classroom this time, right? And so we don't just have one person going in and giving a biased approach, and then when scholars or teachers need help, we're able to kind of put little notes on, hey, look for this, and this is what I've already spoken to the teacher about, and that kind of helps us just stay on track and focus with supporting our teachers. Again, as I talked about scholar goal setting and progress monitoring of their class data on their new student data. So it's something I mentioned before with regards to what we've been doing around when we had our AFAs, teachers kind of beat us to the punch with those, which was a good opportunity for them to set goals. And then I'm going to this before I go to this, I'm already here, but I will talk about that, but just some noteworthy things, right? While these right here were our focus areas for English, math, and science, some of the things I just want to make note of are algebraic concepts. We had a growth of 16% for 7th graders and 24% for 8th graders. Geometry growth, we had 19% for 8th graders. Numbers and operations, we had 14% growth for 7th graders and a growth of 20% for physical science, and science is our 8th graders, right? And so 13% for biological science. Going over to the areas of need improvement. So you're not going to see any areas where we dropped, which I think is a good thing that we're proud of. But I think we do also want to just highlight the fact that, we had some non-school improvement focus areas that we wanted to actually bring some attention to that we know we have to look at and be aware of. And so when we talk about our areas of focus, we had a 6% increase while we went up. We're still not happy with that, right? So we know we have to make some adjustments and changes there. Same thing with craft structure. Again, we had a 4% increase. We're happy that we went up, but we're not happy with necessarily the progress that we made. We go to 8th grade English, looking at just 3% increase for key ideas and details. Vocabulary acquisition, 4% increase, which was a non-school improvement focus area. So it's something we want to kind of keep our eyes on. 7th grade math, measurement of probability and data, we had an 8% increase. Again, it was not a focus area. Geometry, we had a 9% increase for 7th grade. 8th grade math, measurement of probability and data, 4% increase. Again, not a SIP focus area. Numbers and operations, 6%, not a SIP area. And then 8th grade science, earth science was a 4% increase. Again, not a SIP area, but we're kind of ensuring that we stay focused on, although we have focus areas, we still are looking at the entire pie. But we just want to make sure that our teachers have an understanding of areas like, hey, this might be our focus, but let's not forget about this, right? And so we know we have some work to continue to do to ensure that we hit those areas that were not necessarily our focus areas. Our next steps, use of our Navigator reports for all 3 benchmarks. I think that's still important to really do. I know it takes time to get those. And so time is definitely of the essence of trying to get those so teachers don't have to do as much work digging into the data. And we don't have to do as much work trying to get the data to them. Peer teacher observations, it's something we started a little bit last year. We did a little bit more this year. So we want to continue and beef those up and having teachers be able to observe and view other teachers. Continue professional development on small group instruction support. I can definitely tell you from last year, teachers were like, small group instruction, right? And this year, going into a classroom and seeing a bunch of children, 5 to 6 children, during a regular classroom, not during intervention classroom, huddled around a teacher and they're delivering that small group instruction. It's been a wonder to see, especially in our math classes. We're continuing along with our AFAs after benchmark 2 and benchmark 3. We did it this year before PSSAs, so we're hopeful that that has a positive impact. I'll be honest, there was a question about PSSAs. I hate to say this, but I really do believe children and parents, right, are more focused on our benchmarks. I don't know why, because we have some of the conversations we have around that, where we have 90 children, opting out of PSSAs versus none opting out with benchmarks, right? And their rationale is around it being a standardized test and this, and it's biased. Well, the benchmark is like the same thing, right? So, so it's the buy-in, trying to get our families to buy back into why we should take the PSSAs, I think is really important. I sent the letter out to my families, asking them to continue to buy into taking it and why it's important. Now more so than ever, just around them coming back from COVID and us being able to have a fair evaluation of where our children stand is important to us. And so next thing, just continued use of data sharing with our parents. So this year, I'm really proud of working with Ms. Scriven. We were able to load our benchmark data into PowerSchool, and then we sent links out to our parents so they can actually find out and see how their children are performing. And I think that right there, we can create that and help that be a culture within our district. I think that can really support our parents with them, putting emphasis on our children really doing their very best when it comes to benchmarks, which can be extremely long because a child might be doing very well. And so they could be stuck there for a very long time while other children may have finished. So they are definitely resilient. But that is something that, our children, if that's the one complaint around the benchmarks, that's their complaint. And again, people already mentioned our PLN coaching and literacy network coaching. That's been pretty amazing, and teachers have been open to the feedback. I think that's something we'll continue on with. Next slide. And so this is just our results. I can show you a million other types of results we have that we looked at, but I just wanted to highlight these in particular. You know, we've looked at, I mean, when I say we have a lot of different data slides and things we can show you, you know, we've dug into data a number of different ways. Some of it we give to certain teachers because we know they'll handle that best, and others we give them different data because they'll handle that best, right? So knowing your teachers, knowing your staff, knowing your scholars, knowing how to stuff them appropriately, I think is important, so they can use what you know they need to best approach their scholars and have some growth. So for 7th grade and 8th grade, there are 3 slides in each, 3 data point, or 3, what do we call these? Charts, I guess, in each of those boxes. So the first one, 7th grade evidence of improvement. So the first box here is grade level and above grade level from the first benchmark to the second benchmark. So mind you, our goal is to decrease our below grade level scholars by 10%, right? The first chart's not talking about below grade level, it's just giving you a snapshot of what we did from benchmark 1 to benchmark 2 in regards to grade level and above, right? So as you can see, our point growth was 4.68%, but our percentage growth was 12%. The second box, grade 7 ELA below level decrease. So this is what we've been focused on as far as our goal. So as you can see, we did not make our goal of 10% for 7th grade English, but overall, when you look at all of our data, we did meet our goals. One of the most important things is that significant growth. So in the DRC, we'll give you different data points. And so significant growth is important for us. And so our growth was 21.68% for grade 7 English. For 8th grade English, same thing, that first box is just grade level and above. So we had a point growth of 16%, a percentage growth of 46%. If you look at grade 8, again, decreasing our below grade level scholars, we did a much better job there. We had a 16% decrease and a 25% overall decrease with regards to our percentage. And then again, our significant growth was 34.7%. For grade 7 math, our grade level and above grade level, we went 11.49% point growth, so went from 20% roughly to about 32%. And then our percentage growth was 56%. And then for grade 7 math, our below grade level decrease from benchmark 1 to benchmark 2 was 11.49% points, right? And then our percentage decrease was 14%. Going over to grade 8 for grade level and above, we went from 16.51 to 38.2. So it was a point growth of 21.69%, but our percentage growth of 131%. And grade 8, again, decreasing our below grade level, we went from 83 to 61. We had a 21-point decrease and a 26% decrease overall. And again, as you can see, our significant growth for 7th grade math was 28.32. For 8th grade math was 61.88%. And then science, our point growth from benchmark 1 to 3 was 17.65%. We had an 80% percentage growth, and decreasing below grade level, we went from 77 to 60, so a 17-point decrease and a 23% overall decrease. And then again, our significant growth was 40.63%. So if there is some correlation, true correlation, we are hopeful. We had the buy-in we needed. We're very hopeful that we will have some success on our PSSAs. So, any questions?
Questions for board members?
2-second comment. I was just say, Mr. Mecca, having a child who is at Cedar Brook now, Charles has one, Mr. Roselle Williams has one as well. Coming home with them telling me, you know, we went to the library and we met with everyone, met with an administrator or a counselor, and then it happened multiple times, was like mind blowing and amazing that you guys are able to do that. So I just want to commend you all for that, because I think it was a big task, but I think it's a really awesome thing to undertake. And I think hopefully you'll see the fruits of that labor. It sounds
We're
like
very
it.
hopeful. If not, we made really great connections. for our
Which
scholars.
is, which is also,
And overall, that is our number one.
no, that's absolutely. And they get, like you said, they get faced in with someone that they don't normally interact with, or not in a one-on-one.
Right.
You're not gonna, you weren't in the hallway when you weren't supposed to be.
Right.
It's like a positive
We're in the hall
interaction.
clearing.
Exactly, right. So,
Wasn't because did something wrong. And so,
right.
you know, and I think those are some of the most important things. They get a chance where it's positive, you know, to meet with an administrator versus the flip side. Oftentimes it's not very positive.
right, exactly.
So,
Yeah. So, thank you.
any more questions?
Just a comment, and this goes for other presentations as well. It is so refreshing to see the cycle in action of these are actual results, and you have methodologies that you put into place, and you're seeing some fruits of that labor. And it's hard to say you're getting emotional when you're looking at numbers, but these are really compelling numbers. And I'm thankful for you presenting them. I also appreciate what Dr. Scriven said, that it's not about the numbers per se. I also really appreciate hearing about all the amazing work that's going on in your buildings. Thank you very much.
No problem.
I have a process question. So I know that the common themes I've heard in terms of all the presentations was the value of PLCs. And just wanted to get a better understanding of kind of how much time in the day do you have for teachers to meet in a PLC? Because that seems to be a common theme, a very positive common theme.
So our PLCs are 40 minutes once every 6-day cycle. So I know it might be different other buildings based on what their, I know, based on what their, based on what their days and times are, right? And I know there's like a split time at another school and, you know, or whatever it was at some point. But, you know, but our teachers utilize it very well. And sometimes they're not necessarily going over a test, right? They're talking about what they're planning together. You know, we're doing PD sessions together with them at times. So it depends on, you know, what's coming our way that we need to work on. You know, we've used that time also for them to actually complete the benchmark protocol data sheets, you know, as well. So we can use that time for a lot of different things, and the teachers use it wisely. Our goal is to make sure we're there. Are we there 100% of the time? No, probably about 90% of the time though. You know, and just engaging with our teachers, I think is very important, you know, because we're able to kind of build with them. You know, obviously we've split them to different, you know, based on our skill sets as well. You know, in my building, you know, Dr. Cohen Johnson focuses heavily on English and social studies, and Mr. Smith and myself, we focus on math and science. So we've been able to kind of, you know, develop our skill sets as well to support our teachers.
I'm just wondering whether, is there a reason why it's not uniform?
Yes.
Contract.
It's the CEA contract. And for those of you who've been around for a while, I want to say we got the changes back in 2017, 18-ish. The first contract I was here for that we negotiated, that was why that contract was pretty heavy on costs, because we changed a lot of the time. We took away, we restructured a lot of the time at EP. Their schedule was closer to the CBK schedule initially, and we were able to get back some of that time and put into instruction, and also to put into these team meetings. So for example, and it also, how the time is used has been, it does change from building to building. Some buildings have made agreements with their leadership, instead of having 2 20-minute meetings, to have 1 40-minute meeting. And some buildings have said, no, we want to stick to 20 and 20, which I think we can all agree isn't as effective as 40 consecutive minutes, 20 non-consecutive minutes, two periods of 20 non-consecutive minutes gives you a different feel. So for contractual reasons, we haven't been able to do it consistently across the board, but we're just happy that we're able to do it because it wasn't happening before, and teachers did not have common planning time by grade or by subject area. So that was a big jump and a big lift that we hadn't had here. So I wouldn't call it baby steps because it was a huge step, but we're trying to get closer to all buildings having at least 40 minutes once a week. So Mr. Metcalf mentioned every 6-day cycle. The elementaries, they have it built where they can meet once a week.
And we meet twice a 6-day schedule for 20 minutes.
And there's also team meetings, which is a whole nother
Correct.
meeting time for grade level versus.
So we are meeting with Dr. Reddick, who helped with those initial schedules, and also meeting with principals again, and trying to go back to the table with CEA, because we can still stay within the contract and have the meetings. We just need some concessions on both sides to kind of make it happen. So we're going to revisit again, bring teachers back to the table so that they're a part of the conversation from the very, just like we did the last time. They'll be a part of the conversation from start to finish, so that they can give their input about what works, what doesn't work, what seems to be effective and what's not effective. But what we have now is like 1,000% better than what was in place before, because it wasn't happening at all. When I first got here, it wasn't in place.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
As Mr. DeAndrea comes to close us out, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this publicly. I've said this amongst principal meetings and other sessions that we've had. I just want to acknowledge the work of our new data system specialist, Ms. Heather Scriven. Her work with data and her work with our teachers and principals have been invaluable and a huge improvement from what I've seen, again, since I've been here in 7 years. Some things that we were told couldn't happen, couldn't be done, she has done, and the principals and assistant principals, they can attest to that. And I've never had an opportunity to say that publicly, but I want to say that her work in conjunction with Dr. Riley kind of makes all of this happen, keeps all of the data flowing, and also her work helps to streamline and make it more accessible to teachers and accessible to administrators, and more user-friendly. So plugins we've been asking for, the links that Mr. Metcalf mentioned, we didn't have those. And there's some other things that are not related to this presentation, but I would be remiss if I didn't note that her contribution to all of this has been phenomenal and very timely and very it has taken a lift off of us. A lot of things that we were doing by hand is now being done electronically. So I wanted to acknowledge that publicly because I haven't had a chance to say it in a public forum.
I second that motion.
All right, well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I will be very brief and highlight things that you have not heard in previous presentations. What I will say, though, is the information that we're sharing is a little bit different in that since we're on a block schedule, we had groups of students who took Algebra 1 and English 10 and Biology during first semester. So we do have the Keystone results from first semester. So that's part of the overall analysis here. The other thing that I'll say is the overarching theme is I think you will see that there has been progress in all three areas this year, but there's a lot more work that needs to happen. And I think we've laid a strong foundation to really accelerate that progress as we move into next year, because we recognize that even though there's been progress, we still have a long way to go and a lot of work that we need to do. So on the left side of the screen, you see the goals that we set at the beginning of the year. And then in terms of the SIP implementation, like I said, I won't go through all the details since you've heard a lot about that. PLCs, once again, are really critical to the work that we do. One thing that is somewhat different at the high school than some of the other schools is that many of our teachers are on 2 or even in some cases 3 different PLCs. So for example, a math teacher may meet with the Algebra 1 team one day a week and then meet with a totally different group of teachers because they also teach geometry, and that would mean on a different day of the week. And so for us, we've really focused on what's happened in the PLCs because I think traditionally in many schools, that's been something not just in Cheltenham, but across the country of let's just talk about who's doing what on what day, instead of really focusing on, like I said, when we came together in October, the 4 critical questions of PLCs driving our work. You know, what do we want students to know and be able to do each day? How are we going to assess that? What are we going to do if they aren't meeting that target? And then what are we going to do if they already know it in terms of how we differentiate? On the right side of the screen, you'll see the data from our benchmarks during first semester. Benchmark 1 was administered in September. Benchmark 2 was administered between Thanksgiving and winter break. And on the next slide, you're going to see our Keystone results from January. What I think is interesting is, I know we were talking about the predictive value of the benchmarks. I think you will see for us, at least for first semester, there was significant predictive value in all 3 cases. And so there were increases between benchmark 1 and benchmark 2. And then in a moment, like I said, you'll see the Keystone analysis. One thing that stood out to me is when I looked at the English benchmark between benchmark 1 and benchmark 2, obviously there was less significant progress there. And so we did investigate that. We talked to students. I think there were a variety of factors, but what stood out most in our conversations with students is that those benchmarks were administered the first day back from Thanksgiving break, which unfortunately I don't think produced the best results in that particular case, although they did end up being relatively predictive of where we are on the benchmark. So now if we go to the next slide, I'm going to remind you of the numbers from the previous slide as we look at these. And again, the first on the left column, you'll see the overall proficiency rate for each of the keystones and then disaggregated by race And just for the purposes of the presentation, we only listed the data for our Black or African American students and for our white students. And so that while there were increases in proficiency, there are still tremendous disparities in terms of performance along racial lines. And that's obviously at the core of everything that we do as teachers and leaders and staff in schools. So when we look at our Keystone results for English, if on benchmark 2 in December or right after Thanksgiving, 55% of the students were projected to be proficient or higher. When the Keystones were administered, the number ended up being 59%. But again, there's a huge disparity between the performance of Black or African American and white students. It's also important to note that when we look at Keystone results from last year, and again, this is for the entire year, 48% of students were proficient in the 21-22 school year on the English Keystones. For the second box going down, on the previous slide, benchmark 2, 23% of the students were proficient or higher, or projected to be proficient. The results in January ended up being 25%, but again, still with a significant disparity. Last year for the 21-22 school year, that was 16%. And then in the final category for biology, the number was 49% overall. On the second benchmark that students took in December, the projection was 45%. So in all three cases, the projections were very predictive for us, and we'll continue to monitor that for second semester. And then for biology, again, the 21-22 proficiency rate was 39%. So when we compare 21-22 data to where we are so far with 22-23, in all cases, there's been approximately a 10 percentage point gain. For areas of needed improvement, first and foremost, the thing that stands out most is clearly we have significant disparities when we break down and disaggregate the data by race. And clearly that has to be at the core of everything we do in terms of how we look at opportunities for students and then ultimately outcomes for students, and being very intentional about working with teachers on how we are being culturally proficient in everything that we do inside and outside the classroom. I won't go through all the other details, but I will highlight the second bullet point under areas of needed improvement in each box represents the area of that particular assessment where we need to focus the most. So reading for meaning in English was the area where we have the lowest performance, data analysis and algebra, and then ecology in biology. And then finally, in terms of next steps, one of the key things that we will be doing this year is working with our leadership team over the summer. One of the things that's really helped us tremendously in terms of climate and culture this year is we created a leadership team structure this year that consists of all department chairs, all administrators, and all CEA leadership team members in the school. And that group meets twice a week or twice a month after school, and then also for an extended period over the summer. And that really helps to focus on the whole purpose of being a leadership team is really to focus on instruction. So looking at our data, looking at what we need to do, and then collectively deciding next steps, making sure we've got buy-in through each step of the way and really helping to push everyone along. And the only other thing I'll mention is you'll notice for English and algebra, we also want to really be taking a much more global perspective and not just waiting until the students start the course. But for English, let's really look at our 9th grade performance, what we need to do and how we meet students where they are and use that data. And then for algebra, looking at our 8th grade math performance. So anybody who's known me in the 10 years I've been a principal, it's typically pretty brief.
Thank you, Mr. DeAndrea. Any questions from the board? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank everyone who's participating in this marathon.
And thank you thank you truly for everyone for preparing this and explaining all of this information to us. It's very helpful as one board member, at least, to sort of see where we started and see where we're going. Appreciate the information and thank you for the questions as well. So if there's no further questions, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye.